Nicolás Maduro's capture is the most significant geopolitical event of early 2026. After years of sanctions and international pressure, the arrest occurred during a swift military raid called Operation Absolute Resolution, done by the United States in Caracas, Venezuela. The operation, which aimed to capture the then president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, also resulted in the capture of his wife, Celia Adela Flores de Maduro. The operation took several months to prepare and involved an unprecedented military arsenal. More precisely, more than 19 different types of aircraft, in a total number of over 150, to ensure air supremacy and carry out attacks in the region. Some reports claim the use of advanced stealth technology, specifically the use of the B-21 Raider, the B-2 Spirit's successor, which is currently the most expensive airplane in the world. This would have been used at the start of the operation to destroy underground bunkers and vital communication systems undetectably. In addition to that, the Boeing EA-18G Growler, an electronic warfare aircraft that jams, deceives, and disables enemy electronic systems, such as radars and communications, was also used to blind Venezuela's systems. That, in addition to state-of-the-art unmanned drones, which were also used at sea. The United States ship Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship, served as the command center and mothership for the operation in the Caribbean Sea. And protecting him, several United States Navy warships, including Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, were stationed off Venezuela's coast to maintain naval control and monitor Venezuelan Navy responses. In fact, in President Trump's words, the United States had an aircraft for any possible eventual situation. And, as described in the New York Times article, the CIA, which is the American Intelligence Service, deployed several undercover spies in Venezuela in August, and among President Nicolás Maduro's inner circle. This allowed the United States to monitor him daily and know where he is, who he is with, what he wears, what he eats, and even what pets he has. At the same time, a fleet of stealth drones flew daily over the region where Maduro was, gathering more intelligence data minute by minute. The mission was so complex it required the armed forces' involvement. The United States Navy, the Air Force, Cyber Command, and Space Command, the Marine Corps, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the National Security Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the FBI, among others. It was such a risky mission that it's the riskiest mission of its kind carried out by the United States since Operation Neptune Spear, which captured Osama bin Laden in 2011. But how did the United States plant spies in the Venezuelan president's inner circle? Well, this is where the genius of secret intelligence agencies comes in. As Jensen Hansen, former CIA officer, clearly explained, this was achieved in two ways. The first involved sending CIA agents into Venezuela, claiming to monitor drug trafficking routes and migration flows. The second way, and the most complex, basically consisted of corrupting and offering irresistible proposals for better living conditions. New citizenship, freedom, shelter, protection, and funds for top officials close to the president, including their families. One of these rewards included a publicly known amount, $50 million. And given that Venezuela is plunged into an intense socioeconomic and political crisis, which worsened during Maduro's presidency, and into hyperinflation, growing hunger, diseases, crime, and high mortality rates resulting in massive immigration, it's easy to be tempted by this proposal. The main question is, what is the true reason the United States wants to capture Nicolás Maduro? Venezuela is plunged into a socio-economic and political crisis that began during the presidency of Hugo Chavez and worsened during the presidency of his successor, Nicolás Maduro. This crisis is the worst economic crisis in Venezuela's history and the worst faced by any country in peacetime since the mid-20th century. The crisis is often considered more severe than the Great Depression in the United States or the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. The crisis intensified under Maduro's government, worsening due to low oil prices in 2015 and the decline in oil production because of insufficient maintenance and investment in the refineries. The crisis impacted every aspect of life for the average Venezuelan. In 2017, hunger intensified to such an extent that almost 75% of the population lost, on average, more than 8 kilos, and more than half did not have enough income to meet their basic food needs. This crisis was so severe that in 2014, President Maduro announced a steel shortage. Abandoned cars and other vehicles would be acquired by the government and turned into raw material for the production of rebar, intended for housing construction. Political corruption, chronic shortages of food and medicine, business closures, and unemployment, the deterioration of productivity, authoritarianism, human rights violations, poor economic management, and the high dependence on oil, which is the key to the Venezuelan economy, have all contributed to the crisis. But how does a country with so much oil become so poor and fall into the greatest socio-economic crisis of recent times? Venezuela's situation is one of the most cited examples in economics to illustrate the resource curse. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, about 303 billion barrels. Currently, a barrel costs $63. That means there are $19 trillion just in oil in the country. But instead of prospering, the resource ended up becoming a curse. That's because, under Chavez and Maduro, Venezuela began importing nearly everything, from toilet paper to meat, from polyvinyl chloride pipes to toothpicks, because it was cheaper to buy from abroad with oil money than to produce internally. And because of that, several, if not most, of the industries ended up dying. To make things worse, funds meant for maintaining and improving oil wells and refinery equipment were diverted. With that, the country functioned as long as the price of a barrel of oil was high. And when prices fell, especially in 2014, the country lacked industries to support its economy. This caused it to collapse. The capture of Nicolás Maduro is a combination of legal factors that have accumulated over the years and a drastic change in the United States' national security strategy under the Trump administration. Although the official reason is narco-terrorism and the cartel of the Suns, analysts point to a convergence of geopolitical and economic interests. Maduro had already been wanted by the American justice system since March 2020. The main accusation was that he led the cartel of the Suns, an organization made up of high-ranking Venezuelan government officials and military personnel who allegedly collaborated with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, flood the United States with cocaine. The phenomenon began when Colombian drugs started entering Venezuela through corrupt border units. Thus, the legal basis is narco-terrorism and the cartel of the Suns. However, there are several other reasons, the second one, and perhaps the most cited, being the control and management of Venezuelan oil. After the capture of Maduro, President Trump made statements indicating that the United States would take control or management of Venezuelan oil sales and revenues. In addition, the president mentioned several times that Venezuela belonged to the American economic sphere of influence. The economic interest was never concealed. Therefore, the United States' interest in Venezuelan oil is not just about having the oil, but about who controls the flow, the refining, and the price in the Western Hemisphere. And, most importantly, to allow American oil refineries located in the Gulf of Mexico, specifically in Texas and Louisiana, which contribute about 15% of national production, to operate again at low costs. The United States leads global oil production. But if they are leaders, why do they need more oil? There are about 160 types of oil, and each one is meant to produce energy, or certain types of products which can be car fuels like gasoline and diesel, plastics, asphalt, jet fuel like kerosene, and even petroleum jelly. Each product requires a certain variety or type of oil that is based on density, composition, and viscosity. It's considered light sweet crude oil, which is used to produce high-value products such as cooking gas, gasoline and diesel, jet fuel, naphtha, among others. There is also heavy sour crude oil, which is used to produce fuel oils for ships, bitumen, and asphalt, lubricating oils, among others. And here is the outcome. The United States mostly produces light, sweet crude oil, which makes up about 80% of their production. However, most of their refineries, especially on the Gulf Coast, were designed to process heavy, sour crude oil, like the Venezuelan type. This happened because, in the 20th century, most of the available oil was heavy and sour, imported from Latin America and Canada. And the big industries like ExxonMobil and Chevron invested billions in infrastructure to be able to process it. However, technological advances allowed the light, sweet oil, ideal for gasoline, that was previously untapped and trapped in shale rocks, to be extracted on an industrial scale. However, the American refinery industry was entirely built for heavy and sour oil. That's why Venezuelan oil, once exported to the United States, is now on the United States radar, because the whole industry was built for it. Without heavy oil like Venezuela's, American refineries face higher costs and must import from farther away. Or they modify machines to process the lighter oil, which is plentiful in America. A third reason for the invasion is migration control. For the Trump administration, Venezuela was the source of all the problems at the southern border of the United States. The argument was that as long as Maduro remained in power, the Venezuelan economy would continue to collapse, forcing millions to migrate north. The capture was presented as the first step to stabilize the country and encourage the return of millions of Venezuelans. And finally, a fourth reason is the assertion of geopolitical power. Operation Absolute Resolution served as a demonstration of global strength and was directly aimed at reducing the military and intelligence presence of Russia, China, and Cuba in the Western Hemisphere. Since these countries trade oil and resources with Venezuela, as he recently said in press conferences, Trump emphasized that the capture was necessary to restore American prestige, to show that dictators accused of crimes in the United States would no longer be shielded by sovereign borders. Beyond that, the capture was not just about arresting an indicted individual, but rather a bold reshaping of the rules in the Americas, showing that sovereignty ends where narco-terrorism begins.